to East and West, a show for helping us keep our spiritual bearings as we navigate this world around us. Wes Young here, continuing Season 4, an audiobook presentation of Undine by Friedrich de la Motte Fouqué. If you're joining us for the first time, I strongly advise, as I always do, starting Season 4 at the beginning with Season 4, Episode 1. Today's episode is Undine Chapter 7. Now, as a quick recap, in Chapter 6, Undine reveals that Bertalda is actually the biological daughter of the fisherman and his wife. Bertalda, spurning the idea that she was born into poverty, rejects this news and makes quite a scene. This causes her own foster parents, that's the Duke and Duchess, to disown her. And the fisherman and his wife, that's Bertalda's biological parents, they even say they'll not take her back unless she grows noble. Out of love and pity, Huldbrand and Undine agree to take the impoverished Bertalda back with them to their castle. This sets up a 2 women and 1 man situation, and one that the spirit of the fountain told Undine to avoid. Now let's continue with Undine, Chapter 7. The writer of this tale, both because it moves his own heart and he wishes it to move that of others, asks a favor of you, dear reader. Forgive him if he passes over a considerable space of time in a few words and only tells you generally what therein happened. He knows well that it might be unfolded skillfully and step by step how Huldbrand's heart began to turn from Undine and towards Bertalda. How Bertalda met the young knight with ardent love, and how they both looked upon the poor wife as a mysterious being, more to be dreaded than pitied. How Undine wept, and her tears stung the conscience of her husband, without recalling his former love, so that though at times he showed kindness to her, a cold shudder soon forced him to turn from her to his fellow mortal, Bertalda. All this, the writer knows, might have been drawn out fully, and perhaps it ought to have been, but it would have made him too sad, for he has witnessed such things, and shrinks from recalling even their shadow. Thou knowest probably the like feeling, dear reader, for it is the lot of mortal man. Happy art thou if thou hast received the injury, not inflicted it, for in this case it is more blessed to receive than to give. Then only a soft sorrow at such a recollection passes through thy heart, and perhaps a quiet tear trickles down thy cheek over the faded flowers in which thou once so heartily rejoiced. This is enough. We will not pierce our hearts with 1,000 separate things, but only bear in mind that all happened as I just now said. Poor Undine was greatly troubled, and the other 2 were very far from being happy. Bertalda, in particular, whenever she was in the slightest degree opposed in her wishes, attributed the cause to the jealousy and oppression of the injured wife. She was therefore daily in the habit of showing a haughty and imperious demeanor, to which Undine yielded with a sad submission, and which was generally encouraged strongly by the now blinded Huldbrand. What disturbed the inmates of the castle still more was the endless variety of wonderful apparitions which assailed Huldbrand and Bertalda in the vaulted passages of the building, and of which nothing had ever been heard before within the memory of man. The tall white man in whom Huldbrand but too plainly recognized Undine's uncle Kuhleborn, and Bertalda, the spectral master of the waterworks, often passed before them with threatening aspect and gestures, more especially, however, before Bertalda, so that through terror she had several times already fallen sick, and had in consequence frequently thought of quitting the castle. Yet, partly because Huldbrand was but too dear to her, and she trusted to her innocence, since no words of love had passed between them, and partly also because she knew not whither to direct her steps, she lingered where she was, The old fisherman, on receiving the message from the Lord of Ringstetten that Bertalda was his guest, returned to answer in some lines almost too illegible to be deciphered, but still the best his advanced life and long disuse of writing permitted him to form. "I have now become," he wrote, "a poor old widower, for my beloved and faithful wife is dead. But lonely as I now sit in my cottage, I prefer Bertalda's remaining where she is to her living with me. Only let her do nothing to hurt my dear Undine, else she will have my curse." The last words of this letter Bertalda flung to the winds, but the permission to remain from home, which her father had granted her, she remembered and clung to, just as we are all of us wont to do in similar circumstances. One day, a few moments after Huldbrand had ridden out, Undine called together the domestics of the family and ordered them to bring a large stone and carefully to cover with it a magnificent fountain that was situated in the middle of the castle court. The servants objected that it would oblige them to bring water from the valley below. Undine smiled sadly. "I am sorry, my friends," replied she, "to increase your labor. I would rather bring up the water vessels myself, but this fountain must indeed be closed. Believe me when I say that it must be done, and that only by doing it can we avoid a greater evil." The domestics were all rejoiced to gratify their gentle mistress, and making no further inquiry, they seized the enormous stone. While they were raising it in their hands, and were now on the point of adjusting it over the fountain, Bertalda came running to the place and cried, with an air of command, that they must stop, that the water she used, so improving to her complexion, was brought from this fountain, and that she would by no means allow it to be closed. This time, however, Undine, while she still showed her usual gentleness, showed more than her usual resolution. She said it belonged to her, as mistress of the house, to direct the household according to her best judgment, and that she was accountable in this to no one but her lord and husband. "See, oh pray see," exclaimed the dissatisfied and indignant Bertalda, "how the beautiful water is curling and curving, winding and waving there, as if disturbed at being shut out from the bright sunshine, and from the cheerful view of the human countenance, for whose mirror it was created." In truth, the water of the fountain was agitated, and foaming and hissing in a surprising manner. It seemed as if there was something within possessing life and will that was struggling to free itself from confinement. But Undine only the more earnestly urged the accomplishment of her commands. This earnestness was scarcely required. The servants of the castle were as happy in obeying their gentle lady as in opposing the haughty spirit of Bertalda. And however the latter might scold and threaten, still the stone was in a few minutes lying firmly over the opening of the fountain. Undine leaned thoughtfully over it, and wrote with her beautiful fingers on the flat surface. She must, however, have had something very sharp and corrosive in her hand, for when she retired, and the domestics went up to examine the stone, they discovered various strange characters upon it, which none of them had seen there before. When the knight returned home toward evening, Bertalda received him with tears and complaints of Undine's conduct. He cast a severe glance of reproach at his poor wife, and she looked down in distress. Yet she said very calmly, "My lord and husband, you never reprove even a bondslave before you hear his defense. How much less, then, your wedded wife?" "Speak! What moved you to this singular conduct?" said the knight with a gloomy countenance. "Oh, I wish I could tell you when we are entirely alone," said Undine with a sigh. "You can tell me equally well in the presence of Bertalda," he replied. "Yes, if you command me," said Undine, "but do not command me. Pray, pray, do not." She looked so humble, affectionate, and obedient that the heart of the knight was touched and softened as if it felt the influence of a ray from better times. He kindly took her arm within his and led her to his apartment, where she spoke as follows. "You already know something, my beloved lord, of Kuhleborn, my evil-disposed uncle, and have often felt displeasure at meeting him in the passages of this castle. Several times has he terrified Bertalda even to swooning. He does this because he possesses no soul, being a mere elemental mirror of the outward world, while of the world within he can give no reflection. Then, too, he sometimes observes that you are displeased with me, that in my childish weakness I weep at this, and that Bertalda, it may be, laughs at the same moment. Hence it is that he imagines all is wrong with us, and in various ways mixes with our circle unbidden. What do I gain by reproving him, by showing displeasure and sending him away? He does not believe a word I say. His poor nature has no idea that the joys and sorrows of love have so sweet a resemblance, and are so intimately connected that no power on earth is able to separate them. A smile shines in the midst of tears, and a smile calls forth tears from their dwelling place. She looked up at Huldbrand, smiling and weeping, and he again felt within his heart all the magic of his former love. She perceived it, and pressed him more tenderly to her, while with tears of joy she went on thus: "When the disturber of our peace would not be dismissed with words, I was obliged to shut the door upon him, and the only entrance by which he has access to us is that fountain. His connection with the other water spirits here in this region is cut off by the valleys that border upon us, and his kingdom first commences farther off on the Danube, in whose tributary streams some of his good friends have their abode. For this reason I caused the stone to be placed over the opening of the fountain, and inscribed characters upon it which baffle all the efforts of my suspicious uncle, so that he now has no power of intruding either upon you or me or Bertalda. Human beings, it is true, notwithstanding the characters I have inscribed there, are able to raise the stone without any extraordinary trouble. There is nothing to prevent them. If you choose, therefore, remove it, according to Bertalda's desire, but she assuredly knows not what she asks. The rude Kuhleborn looks with peculiar ill will upon her, and should those things come to pass that he has predicted to me, and which may happen without your meaning any evil, dearest, even you yourself would be exposed to peril." Huldbrand felt the generosity of his gentle wife in the depth of his heart, since she had been so active in confining her formidable defender, and even at the very moment she was reproached for it by Bertalda. He pressed her in his arms with the tenderest affection, and said with emotion, "The stone shall remain unmoved. All remains, and ever shall remain, just as you choose to have it, my sweetest Undine." At these long withheld expressions of tenderness, she returned his caresses with lowly delight, and at length said, "My dearest husband, since you are so kind and indulgent today, may I venture to ask a favor of you? See now, it is with you as with summer. Even amid its highest splendor, summer puts on the flaming and thundering crown of glorious tempest, in which it strongly resembles a king and god on earth. You, too, are sometimes terrible in your rebukes. Your eyes flash lightning, while thunder resounds in your voice, and although this may be quite becoming to you, I, in my folly, cannot but sometimes weep at it. But never, I entreat you, never behave thus toward me on a river, or even when we are near any water. For if you should, my relations would acquire a right over me. They would inexorably tear me from you in their fury, because they would conceive that one of their race was injured, and I should be compelled as long as I live to dwell below in the crystal palaces, and never dare to ascend to you again. Or should they send me up to you, oh God, that would be far worse still. No, no, my beloved husband, let it not come to that. If your poor Undine is dear to you." He solemnly promised to do as she desired, and, inexpressibly happy and full of affection, the married pair returned from the apartment. At this very moment Bertalda came with some work people, whom she had meanwhile ordered to attend her, and said with a fretful air, which she had assumed of late, "Well, now the secret consultation is at an end. The stone may be removed. Go out, workmen, and see to it." The knight, however, highly resenting her impertinence, said, in brief and very decisive tones, "The stone remains where it is." He reproved Bertalda also for the vehemence that she had shown towards his wife. Whereupon the workmen, smiling with secret satisfaction, withdrew, while Bertalda, pale with rage, hurried away to her room. When the hour of supper came, Bertalda was waited for in vain. They sent for her, but the domestic found her apartments empty, and brought back with him only a sealed letter, addressed to the knight. He opened it in alarm, and it read, "I feel with shame that I am only the daughter of a poor fisherman. That I for one moment forget this, I will make expiation in the miserable hut of my parents. Farewell to you and your beautiful wife." Undine was troubled at heart. With eagerness she entreated Huldbrand to hasten after their friend, who had flown, and bring her back with him. Alas, she had no occasion to urge him. His passion for Bertalda again burst forth with vehemence. He hurried round the castle, inquiring whether anyone had seen which way the fair fugitive had gone. He could gain no information, and was already in the court on his horse, determining to take at a venture the road by which he had conducted Bertalda to the castle, when there appeared a page, who assured him that he had met the lady on the path to the Black Valley. Swift as an arrow, the knight sprang through the gate in the direction pointed out, without hearing Undine's voice of agony, as she cried after him from the window, "Oh, to the Black Valley! Oh, not there! Huldbrand, not there! Or if you will go, for heaven's sakes, take me with you!" But when she perceived that all her calling was of no avail, she ordered her white palfrey to be instantly saddled, and followed the knight, without permitting a single servant to accompany her. The Black Valley lies secluded far among the mountains. What its present name may be I am unable to say. At the time of which I am speaking, the country people gave it this appellation from the deep obscurity produced by the shadows of lofty trees, more especially by a crowded growth of firs that covered this region of moorland. Even the brook, which bubbled between the rocks, assumed the same dark hue, and showed nothing of that cheerful aspect which streams are wont to wear that have the blue sky immediately over them. It was now the dusk of evening, and between the heights it had become extremely wild and gloomy. The knight, in great anxiety, skirted the border of the brook. He was at one time fearful that by delay he should allow the fugitive to advance too far before him, and then again, in his too eager rapidity, he was afraid he might somewhere overlook and pass by her, should she be desirous of concealing herself from his search. He had in the meantime penetrated pretty far into the valley, and might hope soon to overtake the maiden, provided he were pursuing the right track. The fear, indeed, that he might not as yet have gained it, made his heart beat with more and more of anxiety. In the stormy night which was now approaching, and which always fell more fearfully over this valley, where would the delicate Bertalda shelter herself, should he fail to find her? At last, while these thoughts were darting across his mind, he saw something white glimmer through the branches on the ascent of the mountain. He thought he recognized Bertalda's robe, and he directed his course towards it, but his horse refused to go forward. He reared with a fury so uncontrollable, and his master was so unwilling to lose a moment that, especially as he saw the thickets were altogether impassable on horseback, he dismounted, and having fastened his snorting steed to an elm, worked his way with caution through the matted underwood. The branches, moistened by the cold drops of the evening dew, struck against his forehead and cheeks. Distant thunder muttered from the further side of the mountains, and everything put on so strange an appearance that he began to feel a dread of the white figure, which now lay at a short distance from him upon the ground. Still, he could see distinctly that it was a female, either asleep or in a swoon, and dressed in long white garments such as Bertalda had worn the past day. Approaching quite near to her, he made a rustling with the branches and a ringing with his sword, but she did not move. "Bertalda!" he cried, at first low, then louder and louder, yet she heard him not. At last, when he uttered the dear name with an energy yet more powerful, a hollow echo from the mountain summits around the valley returned the deadened sound, "Bertalda!" Still the sleeper continued insensible. He stooped down, but the duskiness of the valley and the obscurity of twilight would not allow him to distinguish her features. While with painful uncertainty he was bending over her, A flash of lightning suddenly shot across the valley. By this stream of light he saw a frightfully distorted visage close to his own, and a hoarse voice reached his ear. "You enamored swain, give me a kiss!" Huldbrand sprang upon his feet with a cry of horror, and the hideous figure rose with him. "Go home!" it cried with a deep murmur. "The fiends are abroad! Go home, or I have you!" And it stretched towards him its long white arms. "Malicious Kuhleborn!" exclaimed the knight with restored energy. "If Kuhleborn you are, what business have you here? What is your will, you goblin? There, take your kiss!" And in a fury he struck his sword at the form, but it vanished like vapor, and a rush of water which wetted him through and through left him in no doubt with what foe he had been engaged. "He wishes to frighten me back from my pursuit of Bertalda," said he to himself. "He imagines that I shall be terrified at his senseless tricks, and resign the poor distressed maiden to his power, so that he can wreak his vengeance upon her at will. But that he shall not, weak spirit of the flood. What the heart of man can do when it exerts the full force of its will and of its noblest powers, the poor goblin cannot fathom." He felt the truth of his words, and that they had inspired his heart with fresh courage. Fortune, too, appeared to favor him, for before reaching his fastened steed, he distinctly heard the voice of Bertalda, weeping not far before him, amid the roar of the thunder and the tempest which every moment increased. He flew swiftly towards the sound, and found the trembling maiden just as she was attempting to climb the steep, hoping to escape from the dreadful darkness of this valley. He drew near her with expressions of love, and bold and proud as her resolution had so lately been, she now felt nothing but joy that the man whom she so passionately loved should rescue her from this frightful solitude, and thus call her back to the joyful life in the castle. She followed almost unresisting, but so spent with fatigue that the knight was glad to bring her to his horse, which he now hastily unfastened from the elm, in order to lift the fair wanderer upon him, and then to lead him carefully by the reins through the uncertain shades of the valley. But, owing to the wild apparition of Kuhleborn, the horse had become wholly unmanageable. Rearing and wildly snorting as he was, the knight must have used uncommon efforts to mount the beast himself. To place the trembling Bertalda upon him was impossible. They were compelled, therefore, to return home on foot. While with one hand the knight drew the steed after him by the bridle, he supported the tottering Bertalda with the other. She exerted all the strengths in her power in order to escape speedily from this vale of terrors, but weariness weighed her down like lead, and all her limbs trembled, partly in consequence of what she had suffered from the extreme terror which Kuhleborn had already caused her, and partly from her present fear at the roar of the tempest and thunder amid the mountain forest. At last she slid from the arm of the knight, and sinking upon the moss, she said, "Only let me lie here, my noble lord. I suffer the punishment due to my folly, and I must perish here through faintness and dismay." "Never, gentle lady, will I leave you," cried Huldbrand, vainly trying to restrain the furious animal he was leading, for the horse was all in a foam, and began to chafe more ungovernably than before, till the knight was glad to keep him at such a distance from the exhausted maiden as to save her from a new alarm. But hardly had he withdrawn 5 steps with the frantic steed, when she began to call after him in the most sorrowful accents, fearful that he would actually leave her in this horrible wilderness. He was at a loss what course to take. He would gladly have given the enraged beast his liberty. He would have let him rush away amid the night and exhaust his fury, had he not feared that in this narrow defile his iron-shod hoofs might come thundering over the very spot where Bertalda lay. In this extreme peril and embarrassment he heard with delight the rumbling wheels of a wagon as it came slowly descending the stony way behind them. He called out for help. Answer was returned in the deep voice of a man, bidding them have patience, but promising assistance. And 2 gray horses soon after shone through the bushes, and near them their driver in the white frock of a carter. And next appeared a great sheet of white linen, with which the goods he seemed to be conveying were covered. The greys, in obedience to a shout from their master, stood still. He came up to the knight and aided him in checking the fury of the foaming charger. "I know well enough," said he, "what is the matter with the brute. The first time I traveled this way my horses were just as willful and headstrong as yours. The reason is there is a water spirit haunts this valley, and a wicked wight they say he is, who takes delight in mischief and witcheries of this sort. But I have learned a charm, and if you will let me whisper it in your horse's ear, he will stand just as quiet as my silver greys there." "Try your luck, then, and help us as quickly as possible," said the impatient knight. Upon this, the wagoner drew down the head of the rearing courser close to his own and spoke some words in his ear. The animal instantly stood still and subdued. Only his quick panting and smoking sweat showed his recent violence. Huldbrand had little time to inquire by what means this had been effected. He agreed with the man that he should take Bertalda in his wagon, where, as he said, a quantity of soft cotton was stowed, and he might in this way convey her to Castle Ringstetten. The knight could accompany them on horseback, but the horse appeared to be too much exhausted to carry his master so far. Seeing this, the man advised him to mount the wagon with Bertalda. The horse could be attached to it behind. "It is downhill," said he, "and the load for my greys will therefore be light." The knight accepted his offer, and entered the wagon with Bertalda. The horse followed patiently after, while the wagoner, sturdy and attentive, walked beside them. Amid the silence and deepening obscurity of the night, the tempest sounding more and more remote, in the comfortable feeling of their security, a confidential conversation arose between Huldbrand and Bertalda. He reproached her in the most flattering words for her resentful flight. She excused herself with humility and feeling, and from every tone of her voice it shone out, like a lamp guiding to the beloved through night and darkness, that Huldbrand was still dear to her. The knight felt the sense of her words rather than heard the words themselves, and answered simply to this sense. Then the wagoner suddenly shouted with a startling voice, "Up, my greys, up with your feet! Here now together! Show your spirit! Remember who you are!" The knight bent over the side of the wagon and saw that the horses had stepped into the midst of a foaming stream, and were indeed almost swimming, while the wheels of the wagon were rushing round and flashing like mill wheels, and the wagoner had got on before to avoid the swell of the flood. "What sort of road is this? It leads into the middle of a stream," cried Huldbrand to his guide. "Not at all, sir," returned he with a laugh. "It is just the contrary. The stream is running in the middle of our road. Only look about you and see how all is overflowed." The whole valley, in fact, was in commotion, as the waters suddenly raised and visibly rising swept over it. "It is Kuhleborn, that evil water spirit, who wishes to drown us," exclaimed the knight. "Have you no charm of protection against him, friend?" "I have one," answered the wagoner, "but I cannot and must not make use of it before you know who I am." "Is this a time for riddles?" cried the knight. "The flood is every moment rising higher, and what does it concern me to know who you are?" "But mayhap it does concern you, though," said the guide, "for I am Kuhleborn." Thus speaking, he thrust his head into the wagon and laughed with a distorted visage. But the wagon remained a wagon no longer. The gray horses were horses no longer. All was transformed to foam. All sank into the waters that rushed and hissed around them, while the wagoner himself, rising in the form of a gigantic wave, dragged the vainly struggling courser under the waters, then rose again, huge as a liquid tower, swept over the heads of the floating pair, and was on the point of burying them irrecoverably beneath it. Then the soft voice of Undine was heard through the uproar. The moon emerged from the clouds, and by its light Undine was seen on the heights above the valley. She rebuked, she threatened the floods below her. The menacing and tower-like billow vanished, muttering and murmuring. The waters gently flowed away under the beams of the moon, while Undine, like a hovering white dove, flew down from the hill, raised the knight and Bertalda, and bore them to a green spot, where by her earnest efforts she soon restored them and dispelled their terrors. She then assisted Bertalda to mount the white palfrey on which she had herself been borne to the valley, and thus all three returned homeward to Castle Ringstetten. What an exciting chapter! If this were a movie, Chapter 7, it would be the most action-packed yet. Showdown in the dark valley. And, Huldbrand, brave a knight as he is, this would have been the part of the movie where he perished, had it not been for Undine coming to his rescue, his and Bertalda's. The very woman who's breaking up their marriage, she saves that woman. She saves her unfaithful husband. Undine, like Christ, is a rescuer. Not because the people being rescued deserve it, but because that is just who she is, her humble, loving nature. She is a rescuer. Another example, it is in the name of salvation, of rescue, that she orders the fountain at the castle to be covered with a stone. Even though the very person she's trying to save is, as the fountain's being covered, she's scolding, rebuking, and hating Undine all the while that the orders are being carried out. Again, much like Christ, right? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Bertalda doesn't realize that the fountain is putting her in extreme danger, and that it is in the name of saving her from that danger that Undine's doing what she's doing. And she bears the ridicule, she bears the rejection as she presses on with her mission, which she knows to be a good one. Repeatedly, Undine's faithfulness, again, it shows in contrast to Huldbrand's unfaithfulness. Whatever dreams and fantasies Huldbrand might be harboring, with this other woman, this Bertalda, they are tragically the very dreams and fantasies that are costing him the great life, the capital L, and the fulfillment that is right there for the taking. His castle, his home, his life, all of them are blessed by a loving wife. It's all right there. Why need he seek more? And this Bertalda, to his undoing. Now, on another note, more literary note, did you notice in chapter 7 how the author interjects his own thoughts, talking directly to the reader, giving his own sentiments and opinions and commentary? For instance, the author, he apologizes at the beginning of chapter 7 for skipping over the details of how Huldbrand eventually, over time, fell for Bertalda. And the author says he skips it over because it makes him too sad, as if the author has his own personality and he's talking to the readers about it. This is known in literature as authorial intrusion, and though it has fallen out of fashion, more or less, in contemporary writing, it was once quite popular. Mark Twain, for a famous example, made use of it. And one bit of authorial intrusion in chapter 7 that I like very much and that I find very instructive, it comes at the moment when Bertalda gets the letter from her fisherman father. In the letter, the fisherman, who's now a widower, by the way, he gives permission for Bertalda to stay at the castle Ringstedt, but he also gives a warning that he must not hurt Undine, else she will be under his curse. So he gives her permission, you're free to stay, but he gives her a condition, you cannot hurt Undine. Bertalda happily accepts the permission while simultaneously, willfully rejects the condition. And this is where the author interjects, and I think it's really instructive. Quote, "The last words of this letter she flung to the winds, but the permission she remembered and clung to, just as we are all of us wont to do in similar circumstances." That's the author chiming in. And it's a good point, a shrewd point, and true. For instance, take the Word of God, whatever He may speak to you through prayer, through the Bible, when there's a calling or whatever. How often we're to treat it like a cafeteria line where you pick and choose. Well, I like this. I think I can handle that, but that looks rather unpleasant. I think I'll just pass on that. It's exactly what she's doing with this letter. She's got the written word in front of her, and it says, I'll allow you to stay at the castle, but I disallow you, I implore you, I require you, I command you not to be a point of unfaithfulness that hurts Undine and pulls her husband away. She takes the one, she rejects the other. She's picking and choosing. The Bible says it is for freedom that Christ set us free. Yeah, but it's freedom with conditions. We're free to be God's child. We're free to follow. We're free to live for Him. We're free to call Him our Father and to let Him be our Father. But a father is an authority figure. A happy one, particularly if it's a loving father, a father that knows best and cares and wants the best for the child. That's all good, but it is still an authority figure. And there is much, much, much peril and destruction in rejoicing over the freedom. Of course, we all like that. Forgiveness, mercy, freedom, fresh start. But then rejecting all the rest, the fatherhood, the authority of God. In our next episode, we will continue to see how Bertalda's foolishness, how her cafeteria choosing from the words of her fisherman father are working out and going to play out. And I hope you'll join us for Undine chapter 8. Until then, press on, everybody.